Hi, everybody. It's Rogan, your reluctantly moribund distant cousin. I started to try to make a movie review video just now. Got sidetracked talking about the lousy state of my health and life circumstances here, but you know what? I'm going to talk about a movie. It doesn't really require much talking about. It's just the next movie on my list for 1980. Going to watch everything good in order. After The Lathe of Heaven, the next one you're going to get to is The Fog, John Carpenter picture. It doesn't really require a recommendation from me, is why I don't mind being half-assed and half-dead while I talk about it. There was a stretch at the top of the director John Carpenter's career where it basically could do no wrong. Classic after classic. Anyone who likes classic horror movies knows this. Anybody who likes 80s movies knows this. I did just watch half of The Fog again earlier. Always holds up. Co-written and produced by Deborah Hill, who's involved in some of Carpenter's best, earliest work. I think sort of similar role on Halloween, Before the Fog. Clearly very deeply influenced by the Italian horror movies and thrillers of the years preceding 1980. Also, I don't know how this got past me before, but it's really closely influenced by Osorio's Blind Dead pictures. I mean, it could almost be one of them. Is there anyone who hasn't seen The Fog? I mean, I guess if you're young, and it's part of the point of doing these videos, if you're young, maybe you don't know how good The Fog is or was, or maybe good's not the right word, how essential it is. Maybe the most interesting thing about these early John Carpenter movies to me now is that there's a tremendous split between the mainstream critical establishment at this point in the history of the cinema, particularly genre cinema, and what audiences, especially going forward as time passed and these movies aged and didn't get old, a tremendous split between what we know is great and what the mainstream press and the mainstream audiences decided to insist was at the time good or not good. It's a little more dramatic with a couple of later John Carpenter pictures, but The Fog falls into this. Even in the movie, there's a weird generation gap amongst the characters. The storytelling, it's sort of a neoclassical thing going on. There's all these nods to classic horror literature. Arkham is a place name. Machen is one of the character names. It's also weirdly futurist in terms of the look of the movie. Probably hard to see it clearly now, but these early John Carpenter movies, man, they looked intense then. They were cool looking, very trippy, cutting edge in terms of cinematography and editing, design. A lot of the movies that ongoing, current, up-to-date metrics for viewers engaging in them online now, a lot of the movies, those numbers will tell you are the best and brightest and most interesting of this period. They split really dramatically and radically from what the smart, sane grown-ups would have told you at the time were good movies. And it was weird at the time. I was a little young. I was born in 1971, so 1980 is a little bit before my time in terms of knowing and perceiving clearly exactly what was going on with audiences and new releases at the cinema. But and it got weirder as the '80s progressed. But I don't think The Fog got good reviews when it opened from, well, maybe the crowd that Roger Ebert and his voice represent. And certainly within a couple of years, the stuff that the best horror directors were doing was just pissing critics off. And yet now it's clear the horror and fantasy and science fiction movies from this period are the most exciting and remarkable movies released in English, anyway, in those years. Now, why that split is so dramatic? Well, like I said, there's a weird sense in which it's a culture versus counterculture thing. The stoners versus the sober crowd, the young people versus the old people. And I think that was clear at the time, even, that the cool kids and the old guard, the establishment and the radicals were pretty lined up like opposing teams on a playing field, waiting for the ball to drop. It's hard to believe now which movies made in the 80s were not runaway hits right out of the gate or didn't get good reviews. I didn't actually look up The Fog on this one, and it's a little bit before my time to remember how The Fog was received, so I'm a little jumping the gun and thinking of classics from a couple years later, and talking about this, that by the mid-'80s, I could almost tell which movies were great, by which movies got bad reviews and flopped and nobody liked them. I think that was already going on in 1980. By 82, 83, it was definitely a hallmark of the entirety of the interesting and exciting cinema happening in English, anyway. And also a lot of it is fantasy and science fiction and horror, trash genres, pulp genres, action movies too. The lowbrow dumb guy stuff was actually the most advanced and interesting and intellectually engaging. I don't know the best way to figure out whether The Fog had that going on, except to maybe ask my friends who are 5 or 10 years older than me, and it seems like not many of the people I know even remember that that's how the 80s were. Made me, if you'd asked me to make a list of my favorite movies made during the 80s, released during the 80s when I was 17 or 18 at the end of the 80s, most of them were movies I had not yet met one other person who really liked. But that wasn't really true of Halloween, the Carpenter picture that made his rep and paved the way for him to become the director, the force to be reckoned with as an artist that we know and love and remember today. That I know more people who think George Lucas and Steven Spielberg suck now than John Carpenter. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to remember that there was a time when several of his best movies just flopped and nobody but me seemed to like them. But I don't think The Fog was subject to that. I think The Fog might have just been a moderate success when it came out. I think I've rambled on enough. 10 minutes? Yeah, it's because I'm thwacked. I don't feel good. My apologies. If you haven't, somehow, if you've failed to see the 1980 John Carpenter picture, The Fog, you shouldn't need me to recommend it. But I do. It's a great movie. I'm making a final list of recommendations, it's second after Lathe of Heaven in order for the year. At this point, it's starting to seem like I'm not going to make it to 1989 all working down this list, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try to watch something else later on. If I can reach the laptop I'm watching stuff on, it's like 8 feet away. So, you know, good luck to me with that one. It seems so far away, so far away.